In the halls of the Zhongnanhai, the headquarters of the Chinese Communist Party, there is a map on the wall. It shows the Pacific Ocean. And on that map, the strategists in Beijing see a noose tightening. They scream about encirclement. They scream about a NATO of the East. They warn the world that the United States is building a containment wall to stop China's rise. For once, the propaganda is true. The West is encircling China. But the encirclement isn't a single wall. It is a complex, multi-layered trap designed to break the back of a superpower. Most people look at the acronyms, AUKUS, the Quad, Five Eyes, and they see a jumble of letters. They think it's all just diplomatic noise. They think it's just politicians shaking hands at summits in Tokyo or Canberra. They're wrong. These aren't just meetings, they are specific weapon systems designed for specific kills. One is a hammer. One is a net. AUKUS, the alliance between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, is the hammer. It is blunt. It is heavy. And it is designed for one thing, lethality. It is built to break things. The Quad, the dialogue between Australia, India, Japan, and the United States, is the net. It is wide. It is flexible. And it is designed for containment. It is built to starve things. The question is not which one is better. The question is which one keeps Xi Jinping awake at night? Is it the nuclear submarines waiting in the deep, capable of sinking his invasion fleet? Or is it the economic blockade waiting at the straits, capable of turning off his lights? Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are breaking down the grand strategy of the West. The thesis for this episode is simple: China is fighting alone. It has client states like North Korea who are liabilities and transactional partners like Russia, who will stab them in the back the moment the oil price changes. But China has no true allies. The West, however, has built a masterpiece of alliance architecture. We have separated the war fighters from the economy stranglers, and we are using both to squeeze the dragon. We are going to analyze the raw power of AUKUS, the geographic stranglehold of the Quad, and why the combination of the two is the most sophisticated geopolitical trap ever laid. Let's start with the hammer. Let's talk about AUKUS. When AUKUS was announced in 2021, the world focused on the submarines. The media obsessed over the French getting snubbed. They focused on the diplomatic fallout in Paris. But the real story wasn't the diplomats' feelings, it was the technology. AUKUS is not a treaty alliance like NATO. There is no Article 5 that says an attack on one is an attack on all. It is something deeper. It is an industrial and technological merger of the three most culturally similar nations on Earth. It is the Anglosphere closing ranks. To understand why this scares China, you have to understand the nature of the weapon. AUKUS is about sharing the crown jewels of military tech. The United States does not share its nuclear propulsion technology. It acts as the guardian of that flame with fanatical secrecy. It hasn't shared it with anyone since 1958, when it helped the UK design the Dreadnought. It didn't share it with France. It didn't share it with Japan. It certainly didn't share it with Israel. But it shared it with Australia. What? Because AUKUS is the fighting alliance. It is the alliance built for the worst-case scenario. If a shooting war starts in the Taiwan Strait, NATO might dither. The Europeans might argue about sanctions or worry about their Volkswagen sales in Shanghai. The UN will write stern letters. But AUKUS will fight. The centerpiece is the SS AUKUS submarine. This isn't just a boat, it is the apex predator of the ocean. A fleet of nuclear-powered submarines operating out of HMS Sterling in Perth gives the alliance the ability to hunt Chinese ships in their own backyard. Unlike diesel-electric subs, which have to snorkel to recharge batteries, making them vulnerable to radar and satellites, a nuclear sub is limited only by the amount of food on board. These subs can stay submerged for 3 months. They can sprint across the Pacific at 30 knots, sit off the coast of Shanghai or the Taiwan Strait, launch a salvo of Tomahawk cruise missiles, and vanish into the deep before the first sonar ping is heard. China's entire military strategy, anti-access/area denial, A2/AD, is built on pushing the US Navy back. They built thousands of DF-21 and DF-26 missiles to keep American aircraft carriers outside the first island chain. They thought if they could keep the carriers away they could win. But nuclear submarines ignore those missiles. They slip under the shield. They operate inside the A2/AD bubble. They are the door kickers. They are the ones who hunt the Chinese boomers, sink the amphibious landing ships, and sever the logistical tail of the PLA Navy. And it's not just subs. Pillar 2 of AUKUS is the part that doesn't get the headlines but is arguably just as dangerous. This is about hypersonic missiles, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and undersea drones. This is the West pooling its best brains, from Silicon Valley to Oxford to Sydney, to ensure that we maintain a technological edge that China cannot steal or copy. It's about developing the Ghost Shark drone that can patrol the seabed autonomously. It's about creating a quantum cloud that allows Australian F-35s to talk to US satellites in a way that Chinese hackers cannot crack. This is why AUKUS is the hammer. It is made of iron and uranium. It relies on the absolute trust that exists between London, Washington, and Canberra, a trust forged in the trenches of World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. No other group of nations trusts each other enough to share nuclear secrets. For China, AUKUS represents a kinetic threat. It is the realization that the Anglosphere is willing to arm a middle power, like Australia, with superpower-grade weapons just to keep Beijing in check. It destroys the idea that China can bully its neighbors one by one. It creates a unified kill chain that stretches from the North Atlantic to the South Pacific. But a hammer is useless if you can't catch the target. That brings us to the net. If you are starting to see the difference between a fighting alliance and a diplomatic shield, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We are dedicated to showing you the machinery behind the headlines, stripping away the diplomatic talk to reveal the raw power dynamics. The net, the Quad. While AUKUS is about depth, the deep ocean, deep tech, and deep trust, the Quad is about breadth. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the Quad, brings together the United States, Australia, Japan, and India. Look at those names. Look at the map. If you draw a line connecting Tokyo in the north, Canberra in the south, and New Delhi in the west, you have drawn a triangle that completely encloses China. You have built a golden net around the Middle Kingdom. The Quad is not a military alliance. India is fiercely non-aligned. They cherish their strategic autonomy and will never sign a mutual defense treaty with the US that obligates them to go to war. Japan has a pacifist constitution, though that is rapidly changing under the pressure of reality. So, the Quad doesn't talk about nuclear subs or invasion plans. You won't see a Quad army storming a beach. Instead, they talk about supply chains, maritime domain awareness, and infrastructure. To a layman, this sounds boring. It sounds like a trade conference. To a Chinese strategist, it sounds like a death sentence. Here is why. China's economy has a fatal weakness, a vulnerability so glaring that it haunts every decision the CCP makes: the Malacca dilemma. 80% of China's oil imports pass through the Strait of Malacca, that narrow stretch of water between Malaysia and Indonesia. It is the jugular vein of the Chinese economy. If that strait closes, China's lights go out in weeks. Their tanks run out of diesel. Their factories stop. Their strategic reserves would burn out in months, leaving 1 billion people in the dark. Who controls the approaches to the Malacca Strait? India. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands, sovereign Indian territory, sit right at the western entrance of the strait. These islands are not just tourist spots. India has turned them into an unsinkable aircraft carrier. They monitor every single ship that enters or exits. They have airstrips for P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft. They have deep water ports for destroyers. By bringing India into the western fold via the Quad, the US and Australia have effectively placed a thumb on China's windpipe. In a crisis, the Quad doesn't need to invade China. India just needs to close the gate at Malacca. This is the power of the net. The Quad integrates the economic and geographic weight of the Asian giants. Japan provides the high-end technology and the capital investment. India provides the massive manpower and the geographic chokehold in the Indian Ocean. Australia provides the energy, the minerals, and the southern anchor. The US provides the global muscle and the market. China fears the Quad because it represents soft power with teeth. It denies China the ability to use economic coercion. Remember when China slapped tariffs on Australian barley, wine, and coal in 2020? They tried to break the Australian economy to force political concessions. It was economic warfare. The Quad response is to build supply chain resilience. It means Japan and India step in to buy what China rejects. It means the four nations coordinate to ensure they aren't dependent on Chinese rare earths or Chinese pharmaceuticals. It means Japan investing in Australian mines to break the Chinese monopoly on critical minerals. It effectively creates a trade NATO. It creates a bloc that is too big for China to bully. If China tries to sanction one member, the others can absorb the blow. And let's look at the diplomatic genius here. This is a Western pride moment. The United States and Australia managed to bring India, a nation that spent the Cold War suspicious of the West, friendly with Russia and fiercely independent, into an alignment against China. They managed to get Japan, a former mortal enemy of the US and Australia, and a nation historically hesitant to offend Beijing, to become the cornerstone of Pacific security. They built a coalition of democracies that includes Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, and secularists. It includes the oldest democracy, US, the largest democracy, India, and the most populous democracy. This shatters Beijing's narrative. China likes to tell the world that the West is just a racist, colonial club trying to keep Asia down. They try to frame the conflict as East versus West, or Asia versus the imperialists. But the Quad is Asia. Japan and India are the two great powers of Asia. When they stand with Australia and the US, it proves that this isn't the West versus the East. It is democracy versus autocracy. It is rule of law versus rule by force. The net works by strangulation. It doesn't need to fire a shot. It just needs to exist. It forces China to spend billions on the Belt and Road Initiative, trying to build pipelines across Pakistan and railways through Central Asia just to bypass the Malacca trap. Pipelines that are vulnerable to terrorists, insurgents, and instability. The Quad forces China to realize that it can be isolated. It can be cut off. It creates a psychological containment where Beijing realizes that its economic miracle exists at the mercy of the democracies that patrol the sea lanes. While AUKUS is the inner circle of family who will fight in the trench, the Quad is the outer circle of friends who will hold the line, pay the bills, and starve the enemy. The nightmare. So, which one scares China more? If you ask a PLA admiral staring at satellite photos of submarine bases, he will point to AUKUS. He fears the Virginia-class sub. He fears the hypersonic missile. He fears the direct kinetic defeat of his fleet. To the military mind, AUKUS is the immediate threat. It is the gun pointed at his head. It forces him to spend his budget on anti-submarine warfare, forcing a technological arms race he might not win. But if you ask a CCP Politburo member, someone responsible for the economy, social stability, and the survival of the regime, he will point to the Quad. He fears the blockade. He fears the unified front of democracies. He fears the slow strangulation of the Chinese dream. To the political mind, the Quad is the existential threat. It is the wall that stops China from becoming the hegemon of Asia. The verdict is that Beijing's nightmare isn't fighting one or the other. It is the synergy. It is the fact that they work together. The West has been smart enough to not force a one-size-fits-all alliance. We didn't try to force India to join AUKUS. We knew they wouldn't. Their history of non-alignment runs too deep. We didn't try to restrict AUKUS tech to the Quad. We knew it was too sensitive to share outside the Anglosphere. Instead, we built a modular system. We built a toolkit. Think of it like a medieval battle strategy. AUKUS is the heavy cavalry. They are the knights in armor, nuclear subs, waiting on the hill to charge. They are the shock troops. The Quad is the infantry and the archers, India, Japan, forming the shield wall and raining arrows. They hold the ground. China is the enemy army in the middle. If they charge the shield wall, the Quad, they get ground down by India's mass and Japan's tech. They get stuck in a grinding war of attrition they cannot win. If they try to flank the wall, they get smashed by the heavy cavalry, AUKUS. There is no good move for Beijing. This dual structure allows the West to play good cop, bad cop. The Quad can hold joint naval exercises for humanitarian relief, invite other nations like Vietnam, Indonesia, or the Philippines to join, and appear inclusive and peaceful. They can talk about vaccines and climate change. This makes it hard for China to demonize them without looking paranoid. Meanwhile, AUKUS can test hypersonic missiles in the Australian desert, reminding everyone of the iron fist inside the velvet glove. This confuses Chinese strategy. They don't know who to yell at. If they scream at India, the US steps in. If they threaten Australia, the UK and US step in. It is the ultimate checkmate. And it reveals the fundamental weakness of the authoritarian model. Dictatorships like China have client states. North Korea does what it is told because it has to. It relies on Chinese food aid. Pakistan takes Chinese money because it is broke. These are relationships of dependency and debt. Democracies have allies. Australia isn't in AUKUS because the US forced us. We are there because we chose to be. We are there because we calculated our own national interest. India isn't in the Quad because they need American aid. They are there because they see China as a threat to their own sovereignty in the Himalayas. These are relationships of mutual interest, and that makes them unbreakable. A client state will defect the moment the money runs out. An ally will fight because they are fighting for themselves. Conclusion. The narrative of Western decline is a popular one in the state-run media of our adversaries. They love to show clips of protests in London or arguments in Washington and claim that the West is falling apart, that we are decadent and divided. But look at the map. Look at the architecture we have built in just 5 years. We have revitalized NATO in Europe to fence in Russia, expanding it to include Finland and Sweden. And in the Pacific, we have constructed a double-layered trap for China that is arguably stronger than NATO. We built the hammer of AUKUS, bringing the most destructive power humanity has ever invented, nuclear propulsion, to the southern hemisphere, creating a permanent deterrent force south of the equator. We built the net of the Quad, uniting the immense economic and geographic power of the Indo-Pacific democracies, securing the trade routes that fuel the world. China is looking for a way out. They are trying to charm Europe, hoping to peel them away from the US. They are trying to buy influence in the Pacific Islands, looking for a hole in the net. But everywhere they turn they see the trap. They see the Indian Navy in the west, guarding the Andaman Sea. They see the Japanese Navy in the north, guarding the Ryukyu chain. They see the Australian Navy in the south, guarding the approaches to the Pacific. And backing them all is the United States, the global superpower. The circle is closed. The containment is real. The versus question is a trick. It isn't AUKUS or the Quad. It is AUKUS and the Quad. It is iron and gold. It is the hammer and the net. And together they are the reason why the Pacific century will remain a century of freedom, not a century of servitude. The West has demonstrated that it still has the will, the wit, and the weapons to shape the future. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Which do you think is the more effective strategy? The raw military power of AUKUS or the diplomatic and economic weight of the Quad? Let us know in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay realistic, and we'll see you in the next one.